And let's get back to our top story this morning, the study published today in the Canadian Medical Association Journal that is certainly going to reopen the discussion, the medical marijuana debate. The study has found that people who suffer from chronic pain, a particular kind of pain, who smoked cannabis not very much, but daily for a period of time, didn't only experience less pain, but saw improvements to their sleep patterns and their mood. Now, those are conclusions that our next guest knows much more about. He's the lead author of the study, Dr. Mark Ware, joining me from Montreal this morning. Dr. Ware, good morning.
Good morning, Heather.
Thanks for being here today. I'd like to start with this. What is the main question your study has answered?
The main question was really the one posed by patients, and that was that the cannabis use in certain conditions seemed to relieve pain. When we began the trial, these questions had never been addressed in a formal scientific clinical trial, and so we addressed the question, does smoking small amounts of cannabis for a small period of time reduce the pain intensity that these people suffer when compared to a placebo or a cannabis with no active ingredient in it?
And so it was, as I said, a single inhalation 3 times a day for that short period you mentioned. And what effects did it have?
Well, the effect, we used a pipe device, so it's important to point out that the pipe was a small, it's kind of something you could find on the internet. We had to approve a medical device license, and the patients would put a small amount of the cannabis into the pipe and do a single inhalation 3 times daily for 5 days. We found that from between the 0 and the 9.4% THC, improvements in average pain intensity, which is a 0 to 10 scale of how bad your pain is. We also saw improvements in sleep quality, as you mentioned, using a very standard screening tool for sleep quality, as well as in some of the measures of quality of life. We saw improvements in anxiety as the main dimension of pain, of mood that was affected by the drug.
So it was, would you call that a significant reduction in their pain?
You know, in clinical trials of pain medications, we look for a reduction of between 1 and 2 points on a 10-point scale. That's typically what we would see. In this study, we saw a reduction of 0.7, which is a bit lower than what you might see in a large analgesic clinical trial. However, for the patients to get into this study, they had to have failed all conventional treatment approaches. They had severe intractable pain caused by nerve damage. So they were very difficult patients to treat to begin with. So the feeling was, while the size of the effect on the scale of 0 to 10 was relatively modest, the impact that this could have on a patient's quality, in fact, the fact that they'd failed everything else, was quite clinically meaningful.
Interesting. And one of the other things you found, which is very interesting, no psychoactive effects or very small psychoactive effects, meaning that they very rarely got high. Why is that important?
Yeah. Well, it was important when we designed the study for 2 reasons. One, because it was a smoked study. We wanted to use as small a dose as possible so as not to irritate or cause any potential damage to the lung. That's a major concern for people when we discuss using cannabis as a smoked drug. The second thing was we wanted to minimize the effect that it might have on impairing their cognitive function, their thinking processes, their memory, and so on. These are things which we know from recreational cannabis studies to be areas that get affected by the use of marijuana. And for patients with chronic pain, they aren't looking for a high or a sort of escape from reality, if you like. They're looking for something to help them be able to get on with a normal, regular life, be able to carry on their jobs, be able to drive, be able to do these kinds of things. So you want a dose that's effective enough at relieving pain, but not to cause these psychoactive effects. And we found that using these very small doses, we were able to achieve the modest analgesic effect and minimize the amount of psychoactivity that they felt or unwanted psychoactive effects.
Interesting. I know you're doing more study of this to look at the long-term health effects of prolonged intake of cannabis, but I want to ask one thing in conclusion, because you have to go off to your big conference to present these findings now. But in terms of questions, I don't know if you feel there are lingering taboos over the medical application, the medicinal application of marijuana, or taboos or lingering questions. Do you think your research will answer some of those, perhaps change mindset, maybe even policy?
I think, as you said at the beginning of this interview, it reopens the debate. The debate is raging on with very little sort of clinical input, very little scientific input. It's kind of a debate that's now taken over by the medical marijuana community and the legalization of marijuana community, and the policymakers and the physicians and the community that works in the science is struggling to have some really good quality data. And I think we put this out there now as a chance to sort of provide some evidence for these discussions. So I hope the debate continues. Whether it'll have an impact on policy depends on whether the policymakers are actually listening and are going to follow up. And this was a study funded by Health Canada and through the CIHR. So it was a study that was requested by the Canadian government, and I hope that they'll listen.
Dr. Ware, we've been listening closely. Great to talk to you on this, and thanks very much for being our guest this morning.
Thank you for having me on, Heather. Appreciate it.